Wanted to do a live video just to kind of update everybody on the now I think somewhat semi-infamous suit known as Murphy v. Lamont, which I am a plaintiff, and I wanted to take this opportunity to well, now that we have plaintiffs exhibits A through double T filed, it cannot be said we do not have evidence. So there are some questions that a lot of people are going to have, and this video is designed to answer all of the basic ones. And we will start by going over the complaint, what it's for. I mean, as amended, we're going to talk about what we're looking for, and then we're going to talk about the facts, which, I know a lot of people like to say settled science this and misinformation that and whatever, but we're going with CDC data. We're going with Connecticut data. We're going with what the official data has been, and we're going with the result. So we had to amend our complaint. It is a 6-count complaint in federal court. It was originally a 4, but certain things had happened and facts had developed, and we just had to update the thing. So count 1 has to do with movement restrictions. Now, when I say movement restrictions, I mean quarantines and isolation. I mean, you can't go here, you can't go there. Basically, we're all on probation. All of Connecticut's 3.5 million residents are on probation. They did not get any due process, as General Statutes 19A 131B required. And the correct official to have enforced any isolation or quarantine was the Commissioner of Public Health, who didn't. It was the governor. And, of course, none of my needs were taken into account. I didn't get notice, and the same is true for the other 2 plaintiffs. So, essentially, we have glorified probation, pretty much. So, the second count has to do with First Amendment restrictions. Now, what do I mean by First Amendment restrictions? It's not just one type of core speech. It's all of it. It's freedom of religion, it's freedom of assembly, it's freedom to run for office, organize politically, and do all such things, as that would be understood. So basically, the governor's orders, not the Commissioner of Public Health, who, had the Commissioner of Public Health made the case and, gone through the steps and left the probate courts open so we could have appealed such orders, we would have due process. Basically, that was all just shut down. So that's count 2. Count 3 has to do with a little unfortunately lesser-known provision of the U.S. Constitution called Article 4, Section 4, which, by the way, for those of you who keep calling this a democracy, well, guess what? You're wrong, and, it's unfortunately not understood to the point where may as well take the opportunity to read this to you. So, the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a Republican form of government. Now, what does that mean? A lot of things, but the primary thing is some things are not up for a vote. Like, you cannot arbitrarily vote anybody's rights away. We have due process of law, things like that. And the law is adequate. 19A 131A and 131B, the scheme that the government claims to rely on, and it's the same with 28-9. All of those are adequate. The problem is the governor's not following them. He has just decided, I'm going to use this opportunity to usurp your entire form of government, and I'm going to make it as such where I am a one-man judge, jury, and executioner. And I'm going to go a little further, and I'm going to say I'm part of an interstate compact with New York and New Jersey and other states, and we are going to regulate commerce, and we are going to stop and detain people, and we are going to restrict who must do what when they go to certain states or come from certain states. See, the thing is, we've now usurped the Constitution of the United States, our governor has. And because us 3 plaintiffs are aggrieved by it, we have sued him for it. So essentially, the governor has decided, I'm going to go ahead and I am the law and the hell with you. And by the way, I'm joining this other compact of states. Now, there was a lesser known event called the Civil War where that happened. It didn't work out so well, did it? So the merits of that cause or whatever, notwithstanding, it's against the Constitution to do what he's done. And he's done it in a manner that aggrieves all of us in a lot of things. So you have count 4, which goes to the the Compact of the States, which is somehow beyond the Freedom of Information Act, which is setting domestic policy for us. I know I didn't vote in any election where Andrew Cuomo is the governor, but he gets to announce things for us. He gets to determine what we do. I shouldn't even have to explain why this is wrong, but we are. And counsel for the other plaintiffs is forced to do that. And, that speaks for itself. So then there's count 5. After the governor has shut down all freedom of speech, all protest, all assembly, you can't go to church, you can't gather in groups greater than 5. It was illegal for me to visit my parents' house because there were more than 5 people there. After all that, then he decides it's cool, where you can protest the death of George Floyd. Now let's mention something very important. That was something that should have been protested. And the problem that I'm having with this is the governor is claiming right and license to say, if I agree with your content of speech, I'm going to let you ignore my orders. Which he not only did, he literally gave people a platform of speech known as an interstate highway. So we're being treated differently and unequally under the law. That's a classic 14th Amendment claim. If we didn't win on that, I would be very surprised, because the governor was not only notoriously open about what he was doing, he specifically commented on the libertarian protests. He specifically said, you can be dumb and libertarian and honk your horns if you want to. And we're in our cars. We're following all the stupid regulations and orders. And then he was messing with the elections law to kind of retaliate against us too. So I'd say I've been treated unequally under the law, as has the other plaintiffs who've wanted to spend this time wisely and help look for his replacement. And then there's the interstate commerce count. Connecticut has basically been impaired, impeded, and held down and taken out of interstate commerce. That's profound. One of the significant times the U.S. Supreme Court had an occasion to visit that was a case called Morgan versus Virginia. And Virginia had a statute where they could basically make, black people sit in a different part of the bus. And the U.S. Supreme Court obviously did not uphold that statute. And they found that it wasn't just, a racial issue. The 10th Amendment wouldn't save the state's effort to discriminate. And, by the way, it's in interstate commerce. So that's Congress's sandbox. So what the governor has been doing is he's been restricting interstate commerce. I know one of our plaintiffs is the captain of a registered vessel. And the governor's orders have impeded the ability of that vessel to, carry passengers and the requirements for getting on the vessel and so on and so forth. So here's what we are looking for. We initially had the original application for temporary injunction, which identified some basic specific orders. But the thing with the governor is he keeps moving the goalposts and he keeps changing everything. So what we ended up having to do was we had to get specific, and instead of pointing to specific orders, we had to point to specific behaviors. Basically, we don't want our movement restricted at all anymore. And there is no such thing as an idea so good that it should be mandatory. And that's kind of the premise we're coming from. So that's the simple explanation. I mean, there's a good, I think, 8 or 9 pages of specific behaviors and things like don't block ships, don't block highways, don't give preference to the Democratic Party of Connecticut because you happen to agree with their particular speech, but make everybody else be subject to these unlawful orders. We're asking for reasonable stuff. This is the thing. They're going to claim emergency and all that, and we'll get into the facts about said emergency. So the bottom line is this. If there is a forest fire or something, or a wildfire that happens, this is a real scenario. This happens all the time in a lot of parts of the country. The fire department can come and basically burn your house down in advance to prevent the fire from spreading. That's like a temporary emergency thing. The governors have done it all the time with like snowstorms. They'll say, get off the roads. Think temporary. Do not think permanent. So the problem we're running into is the governor is laying plans to make this permanent. He wants this permanent state of emergency to happen. And if you've seen the Open the Schools program, at least the framework that's come out, you easily and reasonably understand that hey, he does not plan on letting this emergency expire September 9th. He obviously plans on renewing it, as you would have to do all these insane things. So there's a basic concept before we go into the facts that you should all bear in mind. Now, these two things are true. Doesn't matter, how anybody wants to spin it or interpret it. It's just logic at the end of the day. The first is that correlation does not mean causation. Now, what do I say when I mean that? A lot of people, like, take for example, Barack Obama got elected, and then the next day the sun came up. Obviously, Barack Obama did not cause the sun to come up. It was the rotation of the earth that did that. But a lot of people have kind of used that sort of logical fallacy. It's called a post hoc argument. And all logical fallacies at their heart, involve like a flawed way of thinking and substitution of evidence. So correlation does not mean causation. So for example, the governor institutes all of these measures and infections go down. That does not necessarily follow. Now here's the flip side of that. If there is no correlation, there can be no causation. Let me explain why that's relevant. The rate of spread had been going down before these lockdown orders were implemented. I mean, and even the people that were saying 2 million people will die, even IHME will tell you that. Even their data and their modeling showed you that. So if you're having the rate of spread declining as of March 10th, and even before that, how can you possibly reasonably, logically, and honestly say the restrictions we imposed on March 16th did something? Were the cause. You cannot say that. However, in all fairness to the other side, what you can say is it did cut 1/6 of the transmission. That's important because that tells you the other 5/6 were going on somewhere else. Now, in the case of New York, Andrew Cuomo was very surprised that, oh my God, everyone who's testing positive for COVID is getting it at home. That's very important because that tells you all of these measures, the way they were designed, did not deal with where it was actually spreading. So, although you have the correlation, it does not mean causation. So obviously there's a causal nexus that they're not putting together for you, and you can't say these measures are directly, completely responsible and attributable to the result. Now, there is this phrase called compelling state interest, which is frequently used. It is a legal term, but basically, in layman's terms, it says, here's why the government did this. Okay? So, for example, the state has a compelling interest in murder statutes because they don't want people killing each other. Okay? That's easy to understand. So the state's compelling interest, enunciated and set forth and loudly proclaimed from rooftops, was we want to give the hospitals time to ramp up. We want hospitals to not be overrun with COVID patients. Therefore, we are taking all of these measures, the social distancing, the isolation, and all this other stuff, to prevent the number of infections from going up. Now, wherever you stand on this, that happened. That is a fact. That was the stated policy. That discussion is over. It is done. You cannot go back and say, we're doing this for another reason. That was the reason, and 2 weeks was an extreme measure. Today, we are in day 109 of a 15-day lockdown to stop the spread, to prevent the hospitals from being overrun. And by the way, what they have done is not only did they construct the temporary hospitals, they took them all down. All right? So you have a compelling state interest whose end was already achieved. The result has been achieved. Period. Plain and simple. It's done. So, we have some data here because a lot of people like to talk about it. The one thing you need to know that's very important is we have 51 in this country, 51 different data methodologies and standards. One federal, 50 other states. Okay? Now, we're not exactly dealing with the same yardstick, which is a true federal failure. In policy, it very much is. But the difference is, and to Connecticut's credit, they don't do this necessarily, at least that I'm aware of, but it seems to, reviewing their data, which I do on a daily basis, they count only PCR positives as infections. Now, that's important because you have two ways. You can take an antibody test, which shows antibodies to say whether you've had it, and the PCR, says, do you have it now? Now, PCR is qualitative, it's not quantitative. So what do I mean? I mean it'll tell you if it's present. It doesn't tell you how much you have. It doesn't tell you whether, like, I've just got 1 part per billion or something really small where, like, I'm not going to exhibit any symptoms. And it doesn't tell the difference between that and, like, I've got this raging cytokine storm and all this inflammation, which is, manifested to the disease we call COVID-19. So just because you are infected with a virus does not mean you have the disease. That's an important distinction. Now, the PCR test is just going to say you got the virus. Now, everybody obviously has had it. Now, the CDC, according to their data, according to a lot of estimates, they've estimated the infection rate to be 10 times more than the positives. So Connecticut's done about 400,000 tests. I'm sorry, about that. I mean, this is obviously, it's been around. We know that. All the data points to that. So we're dealing with a disease that's obviously been around. And if my camera would function and continue to work, I could possibly get through these videos in one piece. So on that note, we have the issue of the Diamond Princess. So everyone locked down, everyone on that cruise ship, spread through the cruise ship, and after it had spread from the cruise ship, through the cruise ship, some people obviously had inherent immunity, others didn't. People died, but it was a representative sample that is played out through the population. Then you have South Dakota that did none of this. They did none of this. They basically said, it's a good idea, it's voluntary if you want to do it, and you may do it. They took Sweden's approach, which avoided a lot of the damages from this. Now, Wisconsin was kind of halfway in between. Wisconsin said, we're going to do all this crazy stuff, and then the legislature sued the Commissioner of Public Health, and then that experiment, which it was, ended. And Wisconsin is not doing bad. I mean, they're not showing, the sort of things going on in the southern states that are saying, oh my God, we've got a spike. Now, let's get into that. The reason they have a spike is because their methodologies are combining the antibody tests and assuming them positives with the PCR tests, which are positives. So in other words, they're saying these guys that have had SARS-CoV-2 and are testing positive for currently having SARS-CoV-2, we're going to say they're all current cases. We're going to assume they're cases, even though they're not necessarily manifesting the actual disease known as COVID-19. Now, disease is like you have symptoms for a disease. It's just the definition of disease. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, you're not an epidemiologist, this is not, I'm like, come on, that's medicine. It's just like, making that argument is just like saying, you're not an electrician. How dare you say, like, what Ohm's law is? It's like, it's a law. I mean, this is just science. This is the way it's proven. It can be demonstrated and replicated. This is the methodology. So the science is in on how we deal with these things. And it's been that way for many years, many, many years. And that methodology has led to cures and treatments and wonderful stuff. Kind of like the Math Plus protocol. Now, I know this doesn't sell newspapers and it doesn't get people watching TV, and the governors are not out there being like, thank God for that. Those people that developed the Math Plus protocol using inexpensive, common, off-the-shelf technology, thank God for them because we didn't need the surge hospitals. Do you think they're all on television saying that? No. They're trying to justify all these crazy measures they took. Now, what the Math Plus protocol is, there are two entities that really took the lead on this, and it's spreading everywhere. Doctors are just quietly dealing with it. They're using steroids and anticoagulants and vitamins against CDC advice, and it worked. And it avoided the ventilator shortage, and it avoided a lot of death when they started disregarding CDC advice. Now that's science. The way science works is if you're doing something and it doesn't work, you need to stop doing it. Now, Science differs, I think, as we can all agree, dramatically from public policy. Science told these doctors, we got to stop treating it this way because we're killing everybody. And well, in between that and the nursing home experiment, which Ned Lamont was part of, that was part of his surge plan, Cuomo really was, Cuomo was the winner on that experiment, and he won big. Now, I am no doctor, but I will tell you, it is common knowledge that most people that go into a nursing home do not come out 6 months later. And it is a great place if you're looking to get infected with anything, from C. diff to staph infections. It is a wonderful place to get those things. And the problem is, we thought, nursing home, there must be doctors in there with all sorts of capacity that can help us ramp up for the surge, which never came. And so there you go. So the government ran that experiment, and it failed. And actually, if a doctor had ran a clinical trial like that, he would be decertified in 2 seconds, probably charged with negligent homicide. But hey, you all wanted one-man rule, right? I didn't. That's why I'm suing. I do not subscribe to the belief that one man should be running everything and could possibly even run everything, because there's just a whole bunch of things that are above that one man's pay grade. Now, if I were that one man, I would have a lot of problems too. I would make very big mistakes if I was just one guy, judge, jury, and executioner in charge of anything. And that is just plain not our form of government. And there are a lot of reasons for that. A lot of those reasons are to prevent, nefarious activity, some people treating people differently than others, and, just plain mistake. There's this thing called the miracle of numbers, and it's a mathematical principle that, believe it or not, that's why a lot of bad ideas don't grow legs and run off and get implemented. Now, occasionally, the miracle of numbers will not work with 535 people in the Senate and Congress, but, just as an illustrative example, you have a process to test all those ideas. Here, the government doesn't. The governor just says, I don't know, Governor Cuomo did it. I think I ought to do it. Governor Cuomo is basically our governor in Connecticut. That's where we are. So, as far as this Math Plus protocol goes, it saved a lot of lives. It kept people off the ventilators. And as long as you get it early, according to Eastern Virginia University School of Medicine, virtually everyone walks out of that hospital okay. There's a difference here. I know it's not hydrochloroquine, it's not a magic bullet, it's not a vaccine. And this was the thing. The guys that developed this Math Plus protocol, they're kind of going, what do we have right now? What can we work with? How can we, as they put it, take a synergistic approach to treating this? They're like, well, the inflammation's running out of control. That's what's killing you. It's not the virus, it's the inflammation. And they went, you know what? We're going to address the symptoms, and we're going to get the body up to speed so the body can take over. And it worked. And these exhibits we included in the filings today, they illustrate this concept. Like, walk you through it back to front. There's no mystery. There's no Dr. Fauci this, Dr. Fauci that. It's science. And the reason I say it's science, and the reason it is science, is because when you deal with this methodology, you're dealing with a theory that they had. You are dealing with a protocol that they developed to test this theory. You dealt with that protocol in terms of them being able to replicate that theory over and over and over again to prove that it works. And then, believe it or not, you have the data showing that it did work. People that would have otherwise died on ventilators walking out of the hospital. Not a terribly compelling news story that's going to get the advertisers on board because no one's scared anymore. All right? That should be good news. We should be like, never mind this essential superhero stuff. Like, what about the doctors that came up with this? Like, quietly and thanklessly, they did their job. They did science. Okay, that's all a fact. The Math Plus protocol, go ahead. Explain that. Explain how that didn't work and show me how all this other reticulated nonsense was the cure, was the thing, did implement the policy. Now let's get into that. Masks are masks. That's not true, okay? Masks are not as simple as you would think. Now, there is a lot of data. There's a good at least 20 years of, white papers and studies and meta-analysis The thing about cloth masks, we'll deal with three here because, we did in the case and it's easy to illustrate. There's cloth masks, there's N95 and better, and then there's like full-on bio-level hazard firefighter respirators. Now that third type, if you want to have all the benefits that are proclaimed to be had from cloth masks, you need a full rig. I'm sorry. That's the only way you're going to protect people from, if you're infected and transmitting. That's it. That's the only way. Now, cloth masks. There's a reason, a lot of people have claimed, if you have just a regular cloth mask, you're going to lose oxygen. Look, it's not true. It's bullshit. It's speculation. That is misinformation. However, there's a reason that cloth masks will not present an oxygenation issue. And that reason is they don't work. Period. We have one exhibit we filed which illustrated like a variety of different methodologies that have been used to try to test various masks. The only one that works 100% is a sealed mask around your face. Okay? Now as to N95. Here's what N95 does do. Yes, it does protect you from getting COVID-19, the disease, because it does block the SARS-CoV-2 virus. The reason it does that, SARS-CoV-2, it's, we're talking, what was it, I think like 100, nanometers. I mean, something really, really like small. So essentially, if you want to use a cloth mask, I could give you a more effective thing. You take a big chain link fence, you take a handful of marbles, you throw it through that chain link fence. And then, after you've done that, you take a whole bunch of other marbles, you throw it over the fence. Then, you walk your remaining marbles around the chain link fence and just place them on the ground on the other side. That is what a cloth mask does. Okay? And there's lots of formulas that prove it. Because airflow is one thing. Your mask is leaking on the side. It's leaking up. It's leaking down. And if you're wearing your mask in your car, you are dumb for two reasons. The first reason is, well, it doesn't work. The second reason is, the other person in the car with you, you will breathe everything else they are breathing. The same with planes, the same with indoors, unless you're in like a positive pressure room. So, where you are is, you've got an obvious issue. So one thing I think I'm going to do here, because I see we're having video troubles, I'm going to stop this and I'm going to pick up where I left off.